Hello everyone. For over 250 years, the land we now know as China was anything but. It was a fractured battleground, a chaotic free-for-all between 7 warring states where endless conflict was the only constant and peace was a forgotten dream. Generations were born, lived, and died under the shadow of the sword, knowing only the brutal reality of a nation tearing itself apart. But from this relentless turmoil, one man emerged with a staggering vision. He didn't just want to win a war. He wanted to end all wars. He would unite the rival states, forge a single nation, standardize an entire culture, and build wonders that would echo through millennia. The price for this unity, however, would be paid in terror, control, and an ocean of blood. This is the story of how the ruthless ambition of one dynasty, in just 15 short years, created the blueprint for modern China. This is the story of the Qin. To truly grasp what the Qin accomplished, you first have to understand the world they demolished. Imagine a map, not of one country, but of 7 rivals locked in a centuries-long deathmatch: Qi, Chu, Yan, Han, Zhao, Wei, and lurking on the western frontier the state of Qin. This was the Warring States period, a brutal age where alliances were as fragile as silk and betrayal was just another Tuesday. The old authority, the Zhou dynasty, had long since faded into a distant symbolic memory. Its kings were powerless, which meant the sacred mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule, was shattered and up for grabs. Any warlord with a big enough army and enough nerve could try to claim it. This power vacuum created an environment of constant grinding warfare. Tucked away in the rugged western highlands, the state of Qin was seen by its more sophisticated eastern rivals as a semi-barbaric backwater, a kingdom of little cultural importance. But what the Qin lacked in refinement, they more than made up for in ruthless efficiency and raw military power. For decades, while other states debated philosophy and wrote poetry, Qin was sharpening its sword. Its entire society was organized for one purpose and one purpose only: war. The engine driving this war machine was a radical political philosophy called legalism. It was a direct rejection of Confucian ideals like morality and respect. Legalism was brutally simple. Human beings are fundamentally selfish, and the only way to govern them is through a rigid system of strict laws and terrifyingly harsh punishments. In a legalist state, the ruler holds absolute, unquestionable power. There's no room for debate, no room for dissent, and certainly no room for mercy. The state is everything. The people are just cogs in the machine. While other kingdoms found this barbaric, the rulers of Qin found it incredibly efficient. It was into this hardened, militaristic state that a boy king named Yingzheng ascended to the throne in 246 BCE. He was young, fiercely ambitious, and surrounded by brilliant legalist advisors. More importantly, he inherited the most disciplined and powerful army of the age. But he wasn't content with just leading the most powerful state. He planned on leading the only state. With his power secure at home, Yingzheng turned his gaze toward the 6 rival kingdoms. What followed wasn't a single war, but a decade-long blitzkrieg, a campaign of conquest executed with terrifying speed. The Qin war machine, fueled by legalist doctrine and honed by generations of conflict, was unlike anything the other states had ever seen. Their armies were massive, their generals were brilliant, and their technology, including deadly iron swords and powerful crossbows, gave them a crushing advantage. The dominoes started to fall in 230 BCE. The state of Han, the smallest and weakest, was the first to be extinguished. Then the Qin armies marched north and crushed the state of Zhao. One by one, the others were picked off. The Qin strategy was masterful. Ally with the distant states to attack the near ones. They used spies, bribery, and diplomacy to weaken their enemies from within, before the first soldier even crossed the border. With every victory, the Qin's power grew, and so did their reputation for brutality. Cities that dared to resist were shown no mercy. This wasn't a campaign for honor, it was about annihilation. It was a war to end all wars, and for that to happen, all other warring states had to be wiped from existence. After Han and Zhao fell, the great southern kingdom of Chu, a colossal state, was brought to its knees in a long and bloody campaign, then Wei, then Yan. By 221 BCE, only one state was left standing: Qi, a wealthy coastal kingdom that had tried to avoid the fight by staying out of the way. But now, there was nowhere left to hide. Facing the unstoppable Qin army, The king of Qi surrendered without a fight. In just 9 years, Yingzheng had done the impossible. He had conquered all 6 rival states and brought the entire known Chinese world under his command. The Warring States period was officially over, but Yingzheng knew that the title of king was no longer grand enough for what he'd done. He needed something new, something that declared his absolute power over everything under heaven. So he combined the titles of ancient gods and sage rulers to create a new one, Shi Huangdi. It meant first emperor. At just 38 years old, he hadn't just conquered China, he had created it. And with that, the Qin dynasty was born. With China united under one man for the first time in history, the real work of forging a nation could begin. And if you're enjoying this journey into how the past created our present, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell icon. It really helps us create more content just like this, and you won't miss what's coming next. Conquering a continent was one thing, but holding it together was a completely different challenge. Qin Shi Huang now had to figure out how to transform this patchwork of conquered peoples, with their different languages, cultures, and loyalties, into a single, unified nation. His solution was just as radical and ruthless as his military campaign. Forced standardization on an epic scale. First, he completely dismantled the old feudal system. He forced the noble families of the conquered states to move to his capital, Xianyang, where he could keep a close eye on them. Then, he erased the old states from the map and divided his new empire into 36 commanderies, or provinces. Each was run by an official he personally appointed based on merit, not on their bloodline. This created a centralized government that answered directly to him, ensuring no regional lord could ever threaten the throne again. Next came the sweeping wave of standardization. Just imagine the chaos of trying to run a country where every region has its own money, its own system of weights and measures, and its own written language. Trade is a nightmare, and clear communication is impossible. Qin Shi Huang fixed this with an iron fist. He introduced a single currency, the round Banliang coin, for the entire empire. He standardized all weights and measures. He even standardized the axle widths of carts, so that every wagon could travel smoothly on the new, empire-wide network of roads he was building. But his most lasting reform was standardizing the writing system. While people across the empire still spoke their own local dialects, they would now all write using the same set of characters, the Qin script. This was a stroke of absolute genius. For the first time, an order from the capital could be read and understood in the most remote corners of the empire. It broke down cultural barriers and forged a shared identity that would bind China together for the next 2 millennia. These reforms were brilliant, but they were enforced with brutal legalist logic. This unity came at a terrible price. To fund his grand projects and his massive army, the emperor slammed the peasantry with crushing taxes. To build his new roads, canals, and palaces, he conscripted hundreds of thousands of people into forced labor, where many died from exhaustion and abuse. The most famous of these projects was the Great Wall. Now, Qin Shi Huang didn't build the whole thing from scratch. He connected and reinforced a series of existing walls that the old northern states had built. The goal was to create one massive continuous barrier to protect his new empire from the nomadic Xiongnu tribes. It was a monumental undertaking built by an army of soldiers and laborers, and it stands as a powerful symbol of both the empire's ambition and its utter disregard for human life. But the emperor's tyranny didn't stop there. He wanted to control not just what his people did, but what they thought. Believing all other philosophies were a threat to his power, he ordered one of the most infamous acts in history, the Great Burning of the Books. In 213 BCE, countless texts from the 100 schools of thought were put to the torch. History, philosophy, poetry. If it wasn't a practical manual on farming or medicine, it was ordered to be destroyed. He literally wanted history to begin with him. To drive the point home, historical records claim he had over 460 Confucian scholars executed, supposedly by burying them alive. The message was crystal clear. In the Qin Empire, there was no room for dissent. There was only obedience. As Qin Shi Huang got older, his obsession with control twisted into an all-consuming fear of his own death. He became desperate to find an elixir of life, sending fleets out to sea in search of mythical islands of the immortals and dispatching sorcerers on a quest for the secret to eternal life. His paranoia grew. He started travelling in secret through a network of tunnels connecting his palaces, convinced that assassins lurked around every corner. Ironically, his quest for immortality probably killed him faster, as he began taking elixirs that contained mercury, believing they would make him live forever. But even as he tried to cheat death, he was preparing for it on a scale the world had never seen. Near the modern city of Xi'an, he commanded the construction of a vast city-sized mausoleum, a palace to house him in the afterlife. For 38 years, an estimated 700,000 labourers toiled to build his final resting place. The tomb itself has never been excavated, but according to the ancient historian Sima Qian, its ceiling is a map of the heavens, and its floor is a map of his empire, complete with rivers and oceans of flowing mercury. And guarding this underground palace is his most famous legacy, the Terracotta Army. Discovered by farmers in 1974, it is a silent, breathtaking testament to the power of the Qin. Over 8,000 life-size soldiers sculpted from clay stand in perfect battle formation. Archers, infantry, cavalry, and generals, each with a unique face, armour, and weapons. They were built to be his imperial guard in the afterlife, an army to protect him for all eternity. The sheer scale of it, the incredible logistics, and the stunning craftsmanship represent the peak of Qin's centralized power. It's a wonder of the world, but it's also a monument to one man's ego built on the backs of an entire nation. Qin Shi Huang designed his dynasty to last for 10,000 generations. It collapsed just 3 years after he died. In 210 BCE, the first emperor died while on a tour of eastern China, still chasing the secret to immortality. His most powerful advisors, the chief eunuch Zhao Gao and Chancellor Li Si, were with him. Terrified that news of his death would trigger instant rebellions, they hatched a conspiracy. They hid his death, placing his body in a carriage and filling carts with salted fish to mask the smell of his decaying corpse as they raced back to the capital. During this journey, they forged the emperor's will. They forced his capable and respected eldest son Fusu to commit suicide and instead installed his weak, pliable younger son Hu Hai on the throne as the second emperor. But the empire was a pressure cooker, and with the iron fist of the first emperor gone, it was bound to explode. The brutal laws, the back-breaking taxes, and the endless demands for forced labour had bred deep, simmering hatred among the people. The rebellion was famously sparked by a group of peasant conscripts who were delayed by rain. Under Qin law, being late was a death sentence. Facing certain execution, they figured they had nothing to lose and chose to rebel instead. That small uprising quickly became a raging wildfire. Rebellions erupted across the empire, many led by the descendants of the noble families from the old kingdoms. The second emperor was an incompetent ruler, completely controlled by the eunuch Zhao Gao. The centralized system that Qin Shi Huang had so brilliantly constructed, which relied on one powerful leader, crumbled into paranoia and infighting. The people believed the Qin had lost the mandate of heaven because of their extreme cruelty. The dynasty that had unified China with unmatched military might was devoured by the very people it had conquered. In 207 BCE, the second emperor was forced to commit suicide. His successor lasted just 46 days before surrendering to a rebel leader named Liu Bang. The capital city of Xianyang was sacked, and the Qin dynasty, born in fire and fury, was gone. It had lasted only 15 years. The Qin dynasty was a brief, violent flash in the long story of China. It was a reign of terror, tyranny, and breathtaking ambition. But in its short 15 years, it did more than just conquer. It forged a nation. The Qin's legacy is a profound paradox. It was a catastrophic failure that became an incredible, lasting success. Though the dynasty itself collapsed, the blueprint it created for a unified China endured. The Han dynasty, which rose from the ashes, publicly rejected the Qin's brutal legalism, but in practice, they kept the core of the system, the centralized government, the provinces, the standardized writing, and the single currency. They inherited the very idea of a unified empire, a concept the Qin had burned into the nation's consciousness. The administrative and cultural foundations laid by the first emperor were so powerful that they became the model for every Chinese dynasty for the next 2,000 years. Even the name the world knows for that nation, China, is thought to come from the name Qin. The Qin dynasty is a timeless lesson in power. It showed that a nation could be created through sheer force of will, administrative genius, and utter ruthlessness. But it also showed the devastating human cost of tyranny. and the simple truth that a state built only on fear and control is fragile. Qin Shi Huang unified the land and the culture, creating the political entity of China. His brutal, brilliant, and short-lived dynasty changed China and the world forever. The Qin dynasty was a flash of brutal brilliance, but its collapse gave rise to the glorious Han dynasty, which would define China for over 400 years. To see what happened next, click the video on your screen now and let us know in the comments. Was the Qin's tyranny a necessary price to pay for a unified China? Thanks for watching.